At 65, I live with the consequences of a decision that destroyed my career, my reputation, and my American dream. I was a respected compliance officer at a prestigious US bank until love and misplaced trust led me into a scandal I never saw coming. I was 65 when I returned to South Africa with nothing but a suitcase and a reputation I couldn't escape. People often ask, how could you not see it coming? They don't understand how easy it is to fall when you think you're climbing. I had built my career brick by brick. Over 2 decades in the US, working in banking, compliance, auditing, verifications, I had everything a woman from Pretoria could dream of. A beautiful condo in Queens, a good salary, weekends at brunch with fellow expats. I was trusted, respected, but all of it came crashing down because of one mistake. I let my personal life bleed into my professional decisions, and the man I did it for, a married bank executive who I thought loved me, but who ended up being the reason I lost everything. When I met Marcus, I wasn't some naive intern. I was already 10 years into my role in the bank's compliance division. He was charismatic, smart, persuasive, the kind of man who remembered how you liked your coffee and could quote financial regulations like poetry. Everyone admired him. When he was promoted to VP, I was genuinely happy for him. We worked late on the same projects, sat on the same calls with regulators, and slowly he began to confide in me. At first, it was harmless work, stress, pressure from the board. Then came compliments, hand touches, subtle smiles. I should have stopped it. I should have remembered he had a wife and kids in New Jersey. But I didn't. I mistook his attention for affection. I mistook manipulation for love. And that's where the unraveling began. Our relationship moved from boardrooms to hotel rooms, from coffee meetings to late-night calls that weren't about business. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, at least not professionally. I kept telling myself, we're both adults. It's private, but in banking, nothing is ever fully private. Especially when your signature is on documents you barely read because someone you trust slid them across your desk. Marcus began bringing me files for sign-off risk approvals, fund transfers, project audits. I was on the verification team, and it was my job to double-check everything, but I didn't. I skimmed. I assumed. It's Marcus, I told myself. He wouldn't put me in a bad position. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I stopped being a professional and started being a liability. The first red flag came a year into our relationship. A colleague casually mentioned a flag transaction that had passed through my desk. Something about a private equity transfer with missing supporting docs. I brushed it off. Marcus said it was just internal confusion and told me not to worry. I didn't ask questions. Why would I? We were a team, right? Partners, in work and otherwise. But then it happened again and again. Quiet discrepancies, signatures out of sync, documents filed but not tracked. I started to feel it, an unease creeping into my stomach, but I kept pushing it down. I wanted to believe he was protecting both of us. I told myself, if there was a real issue, someone higher up would catch it. That was my second mistake, assuming silence meant safety. When the federal audit came, it didn't knock, it kicked the door down. I was called into a private office with 2 internal investigators and a compliance lawyer. My hands trembled as they slid copies of documents I had signed, transfers linked to offshore accounts, dummy vendors, internal approvals forged with my digital stamp. I couldn't breathe. "Did you verify these personally?" they asked. I wanted to scream. I trusted him. But that wasn't an excuse. Not in banking. Not when you're the last line of defense between legality and laundering. My name was on the documents, my login, my timestamps. Marcus, nowhere in sight. He was suddenly on leave, his emails deactivated. The man I risked everything for had disappeared, leaving me to hold the wreckage. That's when I knew this wasn't love. It was entrapment. In the weeks that followed, I was suspended from my position pending investigation. I still remember walking out of that glass tower on 6th Avenue with a cardboard box in my hands and shame written all over my face. Colleagues averted their eyes. Some whispered, some stared. The woman who used to lead anti-fraud training sessions was now suspected of helping run an internal fraud ring. The irony was suffocating. I spent those days alone in my apartment, replaying every meeting, every smile Marcus had given me, trying to decode the lies I had mistaken for intimacy. My lawyer advised silence, but my heart was loud with guilt. I wasn't just ashamed of what I had done. I was ashamed of what I hadn't done, like questioning suspicious transfers, pushing back on rushed signatures, demanding transparency. All of it I had let slide for him. Marcus never answered my calls, not once. I called his phone until it went straight to voicemail. I emailed him, messaged him, even drove past the office and his supposed New Jersey home. It was like he never existed. That's when I found out he had fled the country on a business visa to the UK, under a corporate loophole we once joked about. He knew this day would come. He'd been planning his exit while I was still daydreaming about weekend getaways and someday divorces. The reality hit me like a train. I wasn't his partner. I was his pawn. And now I was the only one left on the board to face checkmate. I had been blinded by affection, but now I could see with brutal clarity, and what I saw was a woman who had sabotaged her entire career for a man who vanished the moment things got real. The investigation widened. Federal auditors, SEC compliance teams, and even Homeland Security got involved due to the nature of the flagged transactions. What started as whispers turned into formal charges. I was summoned to testify under oath about funds that had moved between shell companies and overseas accounts. And even though I hadn't orchestrated them, I had approved them, I had verified them. On paper, I was the gatekeeper who had waved the criminals through. The courts didn't care about personal betrayal. They cared about financial accountability. It was my fingerprint on every form, my initials on every log. I was complicit, whether I knew it or not. I'll never forget the judge's words. Gross negligence within a high-risk financial institution is not excusable by emotional attachment. That sentence echoed louder than the gavel. My assets were frozen, my accounts seized. I had to sell my car, sublet my condo, and cash out what little I had left in savings just to afford legal counsel. Friends stopped calling. Church members treated me like I had a contagious disease. Every news headline was a variation of the same headline: immigrant banker tied to multi-million-dollar laundering ring. I wasn't even allowed to travel out of state without notifying authorities. I felt like a criminal even before I was officially sentenced. But the worst part wasn't the courtroom or the collapse of my career. It was calling my mother back home in Johannesburg and hearing the shame in her voice. "But why would you trust a married man?" she asked, her voice shaking. I had no answer, because I didn't want to admit the truth. I thought love would protect me. I thought I was different. Ultimately, I was offered a plea bargain, no jail time, but a permanent mark on my record, full restitution, cooperation, and the final blow, deportation. I had built my life in America over 23 years. My first job was a teller at a small credit union in Queens. I had worked every weekend, passed every audit, risen through the ranks with no shortcuts. But none of that mattered now. A decade of spotless performance erased by a few years of poor judgment. My entire American dream was reduced to a scandal. The flight home was quiet. No family came to the airport. No farewell party. Just me, a carry-on bag, and a stack of paperwork marked persona non grata. I stared out the airplane window as the New York skyline disappeared behind clouds and whispered to myself, "This is what regret looks like." Returning to South Africa at 63 felt like walking backward through time. The world I left behind had moved on. My friends were retired or relocated, my parents were long gone, and the banking industry here was a far cry from the skyscrapers and compliance departments I once navigated. I rented a small flat in a modest neighborhood just outside Johannesburg. The neighbors didn't know my story, not yet. But I could feel the stares when I walked down the street in my outdated suits and sensible heels. The woman who once dined with banking elites in Manhattan was now queuing in local markets, avoiding eye contact. I spent my days unpacking old boxes and my nights replaying every moment of my downfall. I didn't miss the money, I missed the respect, the feeling of being trusted, looked to for answers. Now, I was just another cautionary tale, and every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the headlines staring back at me. The hardest part was losing my voice. In America, I had earned the right to speak on panels, in boardrooms, in strategy meetings. Back home, my shame made me silent. I turned down offers to consult. I was too afraid someone would Google my name. The internet never forgets. I took a part-time job at a local finance office where no one asked questions about my past. I filed papers, typed letters, drank instant coffee from a chipped mug, and every so often, a junior analyst would show me a document to double-check and I'd freeze. My hands would shake. I'd triple-check every figure, every line, every signature. I had learned my lesson, but the fear of repeating my mistake haunted me like a ghost in my chest. I wanted to warn them, these bright-eyed interns and hungry analysts. I wanted to say, "Don't let love blind your compliance." But I said nothing, just smiled, nodded, and went back to my desk. What many people don't understand about the finance world, especially inside banks, is that trust is currency. It's not just about money. It's about who hands you that spreadsheet, who tells you it's urgent, who walks into your office with a smile and a shortcut. We talk about ethics like they're policies, but in practice, they're people. I trusted Marcus more than I trusted the process. That's where I went wrong. It wasn't the affair that ended my career. It was the compromise, the willingness to turn a blind eye to questionable activity because I believed his motives were pure. But love doesn't belong in the audit room. You can't sign off with your heart. And once you do, you're no longer an auditor, you're an accomplice. That's the truth I now carry like a weight, heavier than any penalty the court gave me. Sometimes I hear people say, I'd never fall for that, or she should have known better. I understand their judgment. I've said those same things myself. But betrayal is rarely obvious. It hides behind charm and shared coffee. It disguises itself as ambition, whispered plans, future promises. Marcus didn't ask me to cover for him, not directly. He just created the conditions where doing so felt like loyalty. And I, craving that connection in a cold, competitive world, offered more than he ever asked for. That's what still haunts me, not just what I did, but why I did it. I thought I was playing the long game. I thought I'd cash out, maybe even build a future with him. Instead, I walked straight into the fire, holding hands with the man who lit the match. There are nights when I still dream of the office, my old desk, the glass walls, the hum of servers and spreadsheets. In those dreams, I'm not disgraced. I'm still respected, still trusted, still clean. But then I wake up, and reality greets me with the faint chirping of morning doves and the buzz of the neighbor's generator. My world has shrunk. My name carries weight, but the wrong kind. I once signed off on million-dollar movements. Now I sign off on invoice receipts for petty cash. It's humbling, but maybe humility was the lesson I needed. I had let my role become my identity, and when that role crumbled, so did I. Now I am learning to be something else, a woman who survived. A woman who, though deeply flawed, is still here, still learning, still hoping to turn this cautionary tale into a quiet kind of redemption. There was a time I believed I would retire with honors, maybe write a book about compliance leadership, mentor young women in finance, and be remembered as someone who paved the way. Instead, I became a whisper, a warning. I sometimes imagine what could have happened if I had read those files more closely. If I had dared to question Marcus just once, maybe I would have been demoted. Maybe I would have lost his attention, but I wouldn't have lost myself. That's what truly broke me, not the career, not even the deportation, but the realization that I had abandoned my own standards. I was the woman others trusted to say no when the stakes were high, and I didn't. I said yes, or worse, I said nothing. The silence of complicity rings louder than any lie. One day, I saw a former colleague on LinkedIn. She had just been promoted to Director of Global Compliance. I remember training her, guiding her through her first audit. Her post was filled with congratulatory messages. I clicked through the names, some I hadn't thought of in years. None had reached out after my fall, and I didn't blame them. Scandal taints everyone near it. I stared at the screen for a while, then quietly closed the tab. It wasn't envy I felt. It was mourning. Mourning the life that might have been mine if I'd chosen integrity over intimacy, if I'd remembered that love should never be transactional and loyalty should never cost your conscience. In the world of finance, trust is built in decimals and destroyed in seconds. I learned that too late. People think deportation is just a legal status, but it's more than that. It's a scarlet letter. I returned to South Africa not just unemployed, but unmoored. My qualifications meant little here. The industry had changed. No one was eager to hire a woman who'd been at the center of an international fraud probe, no matter how skilled she was. I applied anyway, got a few interviews. One hiring manager asked, "Do you have anything you'd like to disclose?" I knew what she meant. I smiled politely and said, "No, thank you. That's how it goes now. Every room I enter, I wonder if someone knows. Every handshake feels like a risk. Shame clings to you like scent on old clothes. You can scrub and scrub, but some part always lingers." Eventually, I found a rhythm. I work part-time at a small firm, assist with records, and do basic oversight. I volunteer at a women's shelter on weekends, helping displaced mothers with budgeting. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And sometimes, when one of the women pulls me aside and says, "You seem like you've seen it all," I nod quietly, because I have. I've seen how ambition can turn to arrogance, how love can become leverage, and how one decision, made in the haze of longing, can derail decades of good. If I can spare just one of these women from walking the same path, then maybe, just maybe, this wreckage can grow something useful, something that serves instead of shames. Every year, on the anniversary of the day I lost my job, I take a long walk. I don't mark it on a calendar. My body just remembers. I walk past the same street vendors, the same broken sidewalk near the park, and I sit on the same bench overlooking a fountain that barely works. I think about Marcus, not with anger, but with a kind of numb sorrow. I don't know where he is now. Maybe in London, maybe hiding behind another name, another story, but I do know where I am. I'm here, still standing, still learning to forgive myself. That's the part no one tells you. After the scandal, the silence, and the shame comes the slow, stubborn work of self-forgiveness, and it's the hardest work of all. Sometimes I write letters I'll never send to Marcus, to the regulators, to my younger self. In one letter, I wrote, "You should have walked away the first time he smiled too long." In another, I said, "Love without boundaries is not love, it's self-destruction." And to myself, I simply wrote, "You were enough without him." Writing helps. It gives shape to the guilt, puts a name to the fog. Because what I experienced wasn't just professional collapse, it was personal erasure. I disappeared into his shadow, believing I was standing beside him when I was only standing in front of a fall. Now, I write to stay present. I write to warn others. But most of all, I write so I don't forget who I was before the storm. She was strong, and she still lives somewhere in me. My story isn't rare, just rarely told. Women in finance, especially immigrants, are often expected to overperform, under-question, and quietly bear the burden of everyone else's ambition. Marcus used my loyalty the same way the system used my work ethic. I thought if I worked twice as hard, I'd be safe. That success would shield me. But power protects its own. When the investigation closed, he vanished without a single charge. I, the subordinate, the verifier, the woman who signed off under pressure, I took the fall. It was never about justice. It was about optics. I was easier to prosecute, easier to make an example of, and in the cold language of finance, I became a cautionary anomaly. But in truth, I was just one of many who paid for someone else's decisions. A young woman from the local university reached out a few months ago. She wanted to write a thesis on compliance culture and requested an interview. At first, I said no. I didn't want my name on another record. But she was persistent and respectful. When we finally met, she listened without judgment. She didn't flinch when I spoke of the affair. She didn't interrupt when I described the moment I realized I was complicit. When we finished, she said, "Thank you. They don't teach us this in textbooks." And I realized maybe this was the only redemption left to me. Truth. Honest, unvarnished truth. Not the kind you spin in a board meeting, but the kind that helps others avoid the cracks I fell into. If I can turn my shame into someone else's compass, then perhaps my failure won't be wasted. I still pass by banks sometimes and catch myself calculating risk ratios in my head. Old habits, the language of finance doesn't leave you. I can still scan a spreadsheet in seconds, still spot a misfiled record across the room. But those skills feel distant now, like tools from a life I no longer belong to. What's closer to me now is character, discipline, the knowledge that who you trust matters just as much as what you sign. People think compliance is about rules. It's not. It's about courage. The courage to ask one more question, to say, "No, I need more time," to delay approval even when the person asking is someone you love. I didn't have that courage when it counted, but I have it now, and I try to pass it on. This isn't the life I envisioned when I first landed at JFK with my fresh degree and high hopes, but it's the one I live now with humility, with memory, and slowly, with healing. I share my story not because I want pity, but because I know someone out there is standing at the edge of a similar decision. Maybe it's a bank analyst asked to look the other way. Maybe it's a woman confusing power for partnership. If that's you, I beg you, pause, think, check the facts, read every line, ask the hard questions, because no amount of love or ambition is worth the price of your name, your career, or your peace. Trust me, I paid in full. Now, at 65, my life is slower, quieter. I water my plants in the morning. I walk to the corner bakery and buy just enough for the day. I mentor 2 young women through a local non-profit, both dreaming of finance careers abroad. They remind me of myself, sharp, ambitious, eyes full of hope. When they ask me for advice, I don't warn them away from ambition. I would never do that. But I do tell them to guard their integrity with everything they have, to never blur personal and professional boundaries, to double-check every detail, especially the ones sent by people they trust, and to remember, love, real love, will never ask you to risk your future for silence. If someone does, it isn't love, it's leverage, and the moment you give in, you've already lost more than you know. There are days I still feel the sting. I'll be reading an article about corporate fraud or seeing headlines about whistleblowers, and my heart clenches. Not because I regret speaking out, I regret not speaking sooner. I had the chance, I had the access, I had the proof buried in those spreadsheets, those flagged transactions, those strange internal approvals I should have questioned. But I buried them in my own heart, in favor of fantasy. I lived in a delusion that love would insulate me from consequence. But love, when it's based on imbalance, becomes a trap, and I walked into mine willingly. That's what no court could sentence me for betraying myself. That's a life sentence, all on its own. Some nights, I still hear Marcus's voice in my dreams, not the charming one, the cold one, the one from our last meeting, when I asked him about a transaction that didn't make sense. "Don't overthink it," he said, smiling. "It's all taken care of." That phrase haunts me now. It's all taken care of. That's what I told myself too. That's what compliance teams in every shady deal have told themselves before the crash. It's never taken care of. It's always your responsibility until the day it isn't, and by then it's too late. I try to remember that voice so I never forget what manipulation wrapped in charm sounds like. That's how I protect myself now, not with walls, but with memory. If you're watching this or reading this and you think this could never be you, please pause. I was just like you, smart, educated, sharp with numbers, and sharper with intuition. But none of that mattered when I chose to trust someone over the truth. The downfall of professionals doesn't always come from laziness or greed. Sometimes it comes from misplaced loyalty, from silence, from ignoring the inner voice that says, "Check again." So, if you ever feel that tug, pause, reread, delay approval, ask questions, and walk away if you have to. Your future is worth more than their favor. Your peace is worth more than their promise. Learn from me so you don't have to live like me. I don't want pity. I want this story to mean something. I'm still here, still standing, still rebuilding, no longer in suits or skyscrapers, but in truth. That's what I offer now, not strategy decks or compliance memos, but raw, unfiltered truth, because truth is what I abandoned in those years, and now I'm reclaiming it one word at a time. My name may be tarnished in the industry, but in my little world, in my garden, in my mentorship circle, in my own reflection, I am starting to forgive myself. And if that's the only legacy I get to leave, then maybe, just maybe, it will be enough.